Everyone, so I'm going to be doing a little different this time on the Roman Republic series, and sorry, I'm holding this up, so it's going to be a little bit messy because I'm doing this on my iPad. But I'm going to be using a board game about the Punic Wars. It's called Hannibal and Hamilcar. It's actually two games. Hamilcar is the first Punic War game, which is how the board. Well, I haven't set the board up, but the board's based on that right now. I gotta move Carthage back. My cat was messing with this board earlier. I was having some fun with that. But so this is a board game. It's kind of a really neat board game, and the Hamilcar game is kind of theoretic around Navy and use Navy. Actually, I was going to get some ships to kind of show. Okay, I got my fleets. This one's supposed to be the Roman one. This one's supposed to be the Carthaginian one. In the real game, you put it over here, and you have like a naval battle and stuff. You have these on the different cities to show who owned what city and all this stuff. But it plays like it's a pretty interesting little game. You maneuver your army around. There's a lot to it. But one thing that's really cool about the First Punic War is the Miet, which is like a kind of a version of their Carthage's Senate. So both Rome and Carthage, interestingly, in this time in history, had kind of a democratic form of government. When the Roman Senate was probably one of the most organized and structured government until the United States, honestly. Dutch Republic was pretty organized as well back in the day, but I think in Poland, Lithuania kind of functions as a democracy. But I kind of went through that in a previous series about how the Roman government. There was even a. But yeah, you got the Mint and the Roman Senate. So both governments actually voted. They didn't have necessarily a king. They had more like a upper class, kind of like we do. And the Romans actually had a check in that they had a lower caste of tribunes, which I referenced in the Roman government video that I made. But Rome, you can see they're kind of the red. They've taken over Italy now, as I just said, and their first real advance into Sicily is right here, Messina. And so their advance into Messina to basically, there's a group there called the Mamertines, I referenced, I think that's right, that called on the Romans to help them. And the Romans knew when they were accepting that they were stepping into Carthage's sphere of influence. They kind of expected war. Now, the scale of the war and how it went about, I don't think they expected. The First Punic War actually lasted 23 years. It was one of the longest conflicts in the ancient world. And I'm sorry, guys, this camera's really bouncy for some reason. I'm trying to keep it under control. But it lasted for 23 years. It was primarily fought in the waters around Sicily, not Sicily itself. And as I showed in my map explanation, Sicily had Syracuse, which is right here. Actually, give me a second. I'm going to stop it, and I'm going to put the city markers on. Okay, so I've set this board up, and you got Syracuse right here, first allied with Rome. In the game, they start out allied with Carthage. I don't quite know why. I think it's because in the game, they later on in the war, they do join Carthage because they think Rome's more of a threat. But Syracuse is really the only neutral power on Sicily. They were the one. I remember if you talked about the Punic Wars, they were fighting Carthage. Carthage at this point has taken most of Sicily. As you can see, all the blue spots are like major cities controlled by Carthage. Rome crosses over, and they get this one area, this kingdom of the Mamertines, who is like kind of in the north, and it's based around Messina. So the Romans come in, and then they'll move their army against Carthage. And the first real land war siege happens here at a place called Argentum. And Rome wins this battle. And because of that, all these areas of Sicily fall under Roman rule. But as Rome continues to advance over here, they cannot break Carthage because Carthage naval supremacy. So you got, let me add the Carthaginian ships. Carthage's fleets, right here, are supplying out of Carthage. Right here's Carthage. Are supplying Sicily. And so Rome cannot, just like Pyrrhus earlier, Rome cannot break Sicily at this point. They're trying to take these forts one by one, specifically the ones on this side of Sicily that face Africa. And the Carthaginian navy just every time continues to thwart them. And in this game, it's really neat. You have a dice, and you have like, at one point, there's a token that determines naval supremacy, and whoever has naval supremacy gets to roll the red dice for sieges, and that gives them a huge advantage. The one who doesn't have naval supremacy has to roll the white dice, which gives them a disadvantage at naval combat. Of course, Carthage starts out with naval supremacy. Rome has all these debuffs for their navy, and they have to over time upgrade their navy. And what that represents is Rome did not have much of a navy at the start of this war, and the Romans were very innovative. So a Carthaginian ship crashed somewhere over here in Roman territory. The Romans basically reverse engineer and started designing their own fleet. But the problem is Rome does not have like they don't have the crews, the naval training seamanship experience, as you can kind of see in this box in the game. So they implement a special weapon called the Corvus. And what the Corvus is, it's this basically this big crane that they put on the front of the ship. Let's see if I can find the token for that. Give me a second. So here is the Corvus right here. And you can see it's basically, well, it's hard to see. It's basically a bridge. It's a long pole, cylinder pole. I'm trying to show my arm. Long cylinder pole. It comes down, it bangs into the ship, and it creates like a drawbridge. And the Roman soldiers can cross and attack the Carthaginian ship. And why that gives Rome an advantage is this time in history, naval warfare is based on basically ships would try to ram each other and sink each other, and somewhat use missile, catapults and archers and stuff to flick havoc as well. Well, the Romans, because they weren't as good at seamanship at this time in history and they couldn't maneuver around as well, they but they were really good at swordsmanship and hand-to-hand combat and having like legionaries. It effectively allowed the Romans to go in, get close to Carthaginian ships, trap them with the Corvus, as you can see in this picture, board their ships, and basically overwhelm the crew and take the enemy ship. And Rome starts fighting several naval battles. Hold on, I'm trying to. Some background noise too here, but my daughter's downstairs making a lot of noise. But notably the first real battle was called the Battle of Mylae, which is a lot of them are the early battles are in this northern part of Sicily, but there's also this island here, and Rome fought over it as well. So the early battles are in this general area. Of course, Rome eventually takes this. Rome starts winning. They start winning the naval battles, and they eventually, the Roman fleet starts overwhelming the Carthaginian fleet. The Carthaginian fleet has to back off, and as a result, and a lot of it is due to this Corvus. And so they win several key naval battles. Then they have what's called the biggest battle in basically naval history, which happens somewhere here in southern Sicily. It's called the Battle of Cape Economus. Battle of Cape Economus. And actually, in world history, if you go off the number of combatants, it's the largest naval battle in history. Now, if you go off the ship sizes and number, I don't know if the number of ships, but like ship tonnage, it would be the Battle of Leyte Gulf in World War II between Japan and the United States. There's also the Battle of Jutland in World War I. It's a pretty big one. But basically, Carthage's armies are forced out of Sicily. I told you about in previous about Lilybaeum, which is this city right here. And this is kind of the final. So slowly, the northern shore of Sicily falls to Rome. So Romans, this Corvus, wow, it looks great. And then Rome does something that's not very ill prepared for. They invade Africa. Okay, let's end the war. Led by a general named Regulus. And so now Rome has naval supremacy. And they fought a huge naval battle. Another one. Actually, it may have been Cape. Yeah, it was Cape Economus. Cape. Gosh, let me get the name. Cape Economus. It was off Africa, and that was like the big one, and it basically destroyed the Carthaginian home fleet. Well, Rome started eventually losing some of its battles in Africa, mostly due to logistics. So they retreat, and this Corvus, this is where it becomes a problem for Rome. It hits a storm, and in this game, it's reflected that the storms impact the Roman navy. And literally on its trip, the Roman army's back. 100,000 people and most of its fleet is destroyed by this storm. So, and this becomes a reoccurring problem for Rome. There'll eventually be multiple naval battles. Rome wins the naval battles, but their fleets continue to get pummeled and lose men in storms. And so there's a series of more campaigns where Carthage raises money using the Mid. They have a lot of, this is kind of like the upper class of Carthage. They all get together, they vote, they decide that we want to keep the war going. So constantly, this body over here at Carthage is saying, should we keep the war going or should we not? How much money are we spending on it, etc. The Roman Senate's kind of doing the same thing over here, and this war becomes a bloody war of attrition. Rome is just destroying Carthaginian fleets. Then Roman fleets are being murdered by the storms, and eventually it gets so bad for Rome. Rome loses another. They win a bunch of battles, and they lose a second fleet in a big storm. Both times it's the same thing, and this corvus becomes so problematic. They basically eventually start. You never see it again. They get rid of it; it never comes back. Because what made it so problematic for the Roman ships is it impacted their seaworthiness, as they would their bow would sink in the water a little bit due to this corvus. So storms and other issues tended to be problematic for them. And by the way, Sicily's all a mess right now. Hey, I decided to do a quick codicil amendment to the video to kind of talk about one little piece of the First Punic War I failed to talk about. And of course, you saw in the name of the game title, Hamilcar was the First Punic War, and I forgot to mention the part where he played a part in the late stages of the war. So after, and I'm going to put this in the middle, so this is an interjection I'm putting into the videos that really I filmed it in multiple sections because trying to keep the board game pieces and everything correct was kind of a mess. So that may be the only time I do that. I mean, the second Punic War, I may go back to doing the sitting in the desk, filming, maybe use that Microsoft Paint map that I had. So I don't know. It was fun trying to do it that way, but camera flipped around a lot. It was probably a little bit messy when you see the video, but it was a neat little experiment. But so after Regulus's invasion of Africa, so what happened? That you had the big naval battle, Cape Ennomus. I can never get that name right. Cape Econ. It's Ecnomus, which, like I said, it's one of the greatest naval battles in history. If you go off the number of recorded sailors, it's no battle had as many sailors or participants as this battle. And it was off the coast of Tunisia, which is where Carthage was based in Africa. And so then you had Regulus invade Africa after the Romans win the naval battle. He's actually winning early on, and the Carthaginians on the verge of surrender, as I pointed out. The Roman peace terms are too harsh for Carthage, so they decided to continue to fight. And they start regrouping. And Regulus, they actually start naval raids that cut off his logistics and supply. And so the Roman army has a hard time getting supplied that far away from home. And it was really a very ambitious expedition. And they ended up getting defeated. They retreated. I told you about the storm that literally that fleet was sank, the Roman fleet, by storms, and it cost 100,000 Romans their lives. So massive. You're talking about a storm at sea. They think the Titanic's bad. They lost a few thousand. Imagine losing 100. That's like a whole city of men that they lost in one setting. Well, Carthage reinvaded Sicily after that. That's where Hamilcar Barca comes in. He comes in with a lot of fresh troops, mercenaries, and some of these same mercenaries are the ones you'll hear about towards the end of the war that revolt, and kind of Carthage has to fight them, and that's how they end up losing Sardinia and Corsica. That's another story. But so they did start winning land battles again. They defeated Rome in a couple land battles, and then Rome finally got the upper hand again. And part of that was Rome rebuilding the fleet, which I said, which very unique. I'll get this in actually later in this video. This may come before that change, but about the Roman elites raising their own personal funds and giving it to the government to rebuild this fleet. That's kind of where you kind of stand. That's where Hamilcar Barca, who I think I'll quote this in a second, where I think he was the grandfather or great uncle or something of Hannibal. So he was a big player. He was actually probably the most successful Carthaginian general in the First Punic War, and that was kind of the part where they looked like they were going to come back and retake Sicily. So it was very back and forth attrition war, as I alluded to. So
And that's so I kind of left that little piece out. So I'm going to insert this into the video and have it at the appropriate section, and then so that because there's a little more context about the end of the war and the later stage of it, and that I'd missed out when it was in my notes, but it was hard for me. That was another challenge with the way I filmed this one, is that having my notes were kind of over to the side, so I felt like I had to lean away to read them and stuff. So it was a little bit tougher from a filming aspect. Although I like the idea of using that on concept, it sounded great. I think what could have helped if I had somebody else filming me and then I was doing it. That would have probably been the best route, is have somebody else holding the camera and let me be free handed. But didn't have that. But yeah, I hope you guys are enjoying this overall special, and I'll try to think of more how to do the Second Punic War. It's massive. It is actually probably there's a lot of documentation on it as I went into, and its scope involved pretty much a lot of the whole Western Mediterranean. But actually, the one area that was the least saw the least action during the Second Punic War, ironically, is Sicily, who was the whole focus of the First War. But I'll leave that when I go more into that story. But thank you, everyone.
So Rome now slowly takes all of Sicily, but the Carthaginians come back with reinforcements, and they actually start winning some land battles too. And this was after the second time the Roman lost its fleet in the storms. So Carthage and Rome are about even pari again, and the Roman army is on the retreat in Sicily. And the Romans know, hey, we need to get a navy to end this, but they're about bankrupt. An interesting thing you don't see much in society, and this is well known. This is well documented in their time, is that the noble class of Rome, because the government was out of money, basically privately donated their funding to build another Roman fleet. And it's like, they just keep coming back. Like Rome it's like the third massive fleet they've built that they've lost in storms, and this time it's for good. They come down, and the final battle is called. Give me a second. I didn't look at my notes. So they got the battle of the Agates Islands, which were some islands right near this Carthage capital, and bam, they win. They eventually besiege this city. The Carthaginian army has to retreat. It falls, and basically Rome, after 23 years, both Carthage and Rome are tired. Carthaginian Miet says, enough is enough. We won out of this war. We'll deal with the repercussions, because earlier when they were invading Africa, there was a lot of talk of Carthage surrendering, and they were actually ready to surrender, and they were ready to even give Sicily away, but the conditions from Rome were so strict that the Carthaginians said, okay, we just got to keep fighting. So basically now you got the peace treaty. During the peace treaty, Carthage's army, which is mostly mercenaries, revolts. Specifically here in Sardinia and Corsica, which actually I failed to talk about. During this war, they were invaded for a short period, but the Romans were driven off. These were both owned by Carthage. Well, during the peace talks, rebel armies take control of these areas. Well, the Romans take advantage by landing here and taking both of them. And they basically come back to Carthage. They demand a codicil, which is an amendment, be added to the peace treaty that grants Rome control of Sardinia and Corsica. So basically, after the end of the war, Rome now owns Sicily, Sardinia, and Corsica. So they expand their empire. Carthage is severely weakened, but not out, down and out. They still control Africa. You don't see it on this map. They control large areas of Spain, and Spain becomes the new focus of Carthage. They start taking more and more of Spain over, and that eventually leads them into the Second Punic War, which not as many people died. It didn't last as long as the First Punic War, but it's definitely more grand scale, a larger war. There's a lot to it. Rome actually, even though the odds were a lot even in this first war, and Rome had a huge advantage in the second war, Rome got closer to losing the Second Punic War, and a lot of that is thanks to Hannibal, who I'll get to in the Second Punic War. So Hannibal will come along during the Second War, and it will involve most of Western Europe, as you'll see parts of France. You'll have Cisalpine, and as soon as I flip this map over, actually, give me a second, I'm going to clear it off and flip it over for everybody. You see the second map. Let me step out a little bit. a lot bigger in scope. So the First War was mostly around Sicily. Second War will be fought in Italy. It'll be fought in Spain. It'll be fought in North Africa. There'll be some combat in Corsica and Sardinia. Actually, the one area that I don't think, well, no, Syracuse. Syracuse will revolt and Rome will conquer them famously. It's during the Second Punic War. You have Archimedes. He used, according to legend, used mirrors to reflect the sun and raise and burn Roman ships. So the Second Punic War, I'm going to make a whole video about it. It was massive in scale. I'm not sure if I want to use this board game or not because it's been a little bit clunky with the camera. And I apologize everyone on that. But and my notes were kind of harder to read now that I'm... And initially when I was thinking about this, it seemed like it was a great idea, but it's been less so in my opinion. But you can see the scope, modern day France, modern day Spain, North Africa, Sicily, Italy. So this second war is going to be, on size-wise, when it comes to number of battles, events that are happening, a lot more active than the First War, even though it didn't last as long. And Rome gets... Hannibal really enters Italy. He turns a lot of Italian allies against Rome at one point in the war. He's very close to winning the war, and he gets the closest that anybody gets in pretty much the Roman Republic era, to outside of the foreign invader of Rome, to actually taking out Rome. He is right there at one point. The Rome has no armies. The city's right there. He just don't have the equipment and the logistics to be able to siege it. But interesting thing about, you don't see the Mid in this one. The reason why you don't have it in the second game was actually the Carthaginian government never fully supports Hannibal in the Second War. And I'll get into that in a minute as well. But basically, the First Punic War was very decisive for the Western Mediterranean because it secured Roman sea power. After it, Rome... In fact, in this game, Carthage is the underdog on the navy, and there's a whole mechanic around that where Hannibal can't really go by sea. That's why he crossed the Alps famously, because Rome still has the naval supremacy at this point. And so that was a constant challenge for Hannibal, is not having the proper naval support he could get to keep his logistics going and his campaign going in Italy. And here I am talking more about the Second Punic War than the first one. But it is a very interesting war in the scale and scope of where it went. But so yeah, the first one primarily fought around Sicily. Primarily a naval war. Actually saw more deaths than any war in antiquity. Mostly due to most Roman deaths. I'd say 60-70% of them were done by storms, not actual live battle. Carthage suffered a lot too, but the way naval warfare worked in the ancient world, it opened the door for such drastic casualties, such heavy destruction, and as you can see, nature and the seas themselves were more of a problem than an actual war itself. But I saw a couple of things about the First Punic War I didn't mention, failed to mention. I should have mentioned that most of the accounts for this war come from Polybius. And Polybius was a Greek who was later captured, I think, 146 BC, 150 BC. He was was in the 140s. He was brought to Italy from Greece. And he was the one that documented and recorded most information about the First Punic War. I'll get to information on who published the Second Punic War, but Polybius is very famous for his documentaries where he compares Rome, Carthage, and Greece, and why Rome ended up being the superior power in the Mediterranean. He gets a lot into the cultural ideas about the Romans, and their in his time they were very disciplined, very stoic people. They had a very well-ran government. They were heavily manpower. The way they recruited their Italian allies and were able to motivate them, not by direct control, but enough control that they controlled Italy and were able to conscript from the Italian allies. And the reward systems they offered the Italian allies allowed them to bolster their armies. So that they always, this is a common theme in the Punic Wars, Rome has far more manpower than Carthage. You can even see in this game where they get more reinforcements per turn. They're not as effective sometimes as Carthage is, but Carthage is kind of like having to play the long game or be very strategic, especially the Second Punic War where Hannibal had to defy odds on it. But of course you can see in the graphic the elephants, 4 elephants which Hannibal famously brought across the Alps. But yeah, so the Roman system really allows them to triumph against Carthage, compared to Carthage, who relied a lot on mercenaries, had a lower population, had naval supremacy at the start, a great trading empire, great economics, but yeah, they didn't have the moral or discipline high ground or the manpower of Rome, and you know you'll see it where the Carthaginian upper class really favors their personal wealth over trying to save Carthage, while the Roman upper class are willing to make sacrifices for the good of Rome. And and you hear that in a lot of movies. But that kind of what scales, and it's really, you know, the manpower and the Roman mentality is what allow Rome to emerge out of these two wars as the power of the Western Mediterranean. Of course, Carthage is famous for being, you know, in the early Republic era, they're Rome's greatest rival, and that's true. They both of these wars were epic in scale, and so you can kind of see that. That's why I love this game, Hannibal and Hamilcar. If you're ever interested, because you can kind of relive the war. It's a two-player game only. But definitely a game I recommend for anybody very interested in this time period, loves Roman history. One thing I like about it's how you kind of have to preserve your armies. It's all about logistics and moving around. It's not just about broad military tactics. And there's a political element to the game as well, where you got political events, and you got, when you lose battles, you have to you have to basically get these political markers, and you, over here's your scoring system. At the end of every round, you count who has the most markers, and if you have less, you got to pull markers off the board. Also, when you lose battles, both naval and land, you got to pull them off the board. So it really plays into, like, you want to be careful about fighting, because not only do you lose troops, you lose political points. And if you lose a whole region, you have to take a marker over here, so you start falling behind on the score. And so yeah, it's a very, very interesting game in that aspect. The way the political element, the logistics element of moving around. You got these like warrior tribe areas that block you. You got the mountain ranges up here. You got Massilia, which is, it became the Marseilles, France, but ancient Massilia is a Greek city-state, and they were a famous ally of Rome. Really in both wars, but they come in more into play in the second one, as you could see, because their location halfway between Italy and Spain. They were able to logistically supply the Roman armies that were over here later on, and so that they were helping Rome in the First Punic War as well, loosely through trade and stuff, and they would be a strong Roman ally until they would eventually be incorporated into the Roman Empire itself. Of course, Syracuse, the Second Punic War, they'll basically be conquered and no longer be a nation anymore after this, and they'll be forever, they'll be permanently Roman. Yeah, that's the Punic Wars. You know, let me know what your thoughts were on the series so far. And that's the First Punic War. We'll get into the second one. The Third Punic War, there was a third one. Third Punic War, I'm not going to do in this series because it was such a short-lived war. There was not much to it. It was basically Rome massacring Carthage effectively. And it also ties into the Roman-Greek Wars. So I'll probably have as a brief message, because after Second Punic War, things turn to the east, and Rome starts going east into Greece. They do take a little bit of Illyrium after the First War, but they'll take over Illyrium, which is kind of what's now Yugoslavia, and the whole Adriatic Sea. Then they'll go into Greece, and then eventually into Asia, which now they called Asia at their time, which is now Turkey. And so yeah, that's where you'll kind of be when the late Republic, they're going east into the Hellenic lands. But the Punic Wars, that's how they take over the Western Mediterranean. That's the First Punic War, and look forward to talking to you guys about the Second Punic War, and maybe I'll do a playthrough sometime of Hannibal and Hamilcar. It's a little bit complex, but or maybe I'll have somebody over and we could play through it together. But definitely a great game if you want to relive the Punic Wars and what they were about. But I hope you guys enjoy the series. Up next, Hannibal and the Second Punic War. Thank you, everyone.